time. No, I'm very proud to be here. I'm very happy to be here because I'm from time to time in Nice. It's a very beautiful place, as you have, I think, all seen and felt. And I'm very happy also in connection with CIFE. We see the two. Hartmut was for a long time the director. I think that was a former title of CIFE. And Helga is the director in the Berlin part of CIFE. And we have a very close connection with Cologne and other parts of European integration. CIFE is also a member of TEPSA, the European Policy Studies Association, which has around 40 think tanks all over Europe. So we are part of a wide network of discussions. And by the way, TEPSA, Andrew was member of the board of TEPSA for a certain time. And then I think we found out we were not politically active enough. That was my feeling, that we were more interested in the analytic assessment and perhaps proposals for action. And he is really representing those who want to do action. And he did that in his life. He was member of the European Parliament, and I think that was the highlight of your activities, member also of the Constitutional Convention. I think that was very important, and I remember very well how you described the working of it, how you described what we were doing in this, and how you try to frame and shape the future constitution, which, by the way, as you know, except for references to state-like symbols, remains more or less in procedure the same as the Lisbon Treaty, is the same as the Constitutional Treaty, except for some of these, I would call it more symbolic acts. But symbols are important, as we know, so I wouldn't say that this is not important. But for the procedure, I think you were one of the fathers of the Lisbon Treaty in this sense. And perhaps we can blame you for one or the other thing. That's all his fault. But he will tell us that, of course, he had better ideas than perhaps the majority of the people, and then of those of the heads of state and government in the European Council. He is also now in the Spinelli Group for a long time. He was also the president of the Union of European Federalists, which was created, I think, even by Spinelli in the 60s or late 50s. So I think he was one of those people who tried really to push the debate about how to create a European Federation. He did a very nice piece. You should read that. It's a little bit academic then. Let's say you need to concentrate about the basic law of the European Union, where you compared for Bertelsmann project, you compared the where you compared the present Union Treaty and what you think should be said there. And so it's a synoptic way to look at that, and I think they're interested in each of those points. Spinelli, I look now at Hartmut, who is very much. Spinelli was perhaps not always liked here because he had a different ways of federalism than the fathers, the founding fathers of this place here. But I think all were in the spirit to say what can and should we do about European integration in the Union in the future. So, I think you will speak to us. I wonder a little bit how much frustrated you are about Brexit, which seem to be in good shape. So let's see, we are not too frustrated about it. But of course, we want to listen also more fundamental points of view on the issues which we have here at our commerce session. Andrew.
Thank you very much for that kind dish. Applauded. It is very nice, of course, to be here. It's my first time I've been in the CIFE bâtiment, which is interesting for me. It's not my first time, of course, in Nice, which is a great place. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here again, especially to talk in this important week about the quality of democracy in the EU. It's been a good week. The fact that at last, after 40 years, the turnout for the European Parliament elections has increased. You all recall that graph, which went down depressingly for 40 years. We've now tweaked that at the end, and turnout has gone up from 42% to 51%. That, for some of us who've been toiling in this field for a very long time, is very gratifying. It means that the electors have been paying attention to the EU. It, of course, isn't meaning that everyone loves the EU or indeed the Parliament, but they do at least see that the Parliament is sufficiently important to turn up for every 5 years. The elections have illustrated a greater polarization in public opinion. This has been greatly reported on in the press. I think sometimes a bit exaggeratedly reported, and I think that in a sense was fueled by President Macron and Mr. Orban, who sort of saw it as a pugilistic fight. It was partly that, but it was never entirely that. There are two fault lines inside the European Parliament. The nationalist and again the federalist fault line is, of course, extremely important and is being now more exposed for people to see. But there is also that old classical spectrum between left and right, which informs the colour and the quality of the Parliament as it passes law. But the outcome of this election clearly means that the Große Koalition, which you like in Berlin, the grand coalition of the EPP and the Social Democrats, is now insufficient to carry the House. It's a more pluralistic House. It's been described as a more fractured House. I don't see it myself like that, but I think it's more pluralistic and a greater play of liberal, centrist and green forces on the pro-EU side of the argument will be seen to be effective and indeed critical for the future of the EU. So this is a good thing. We've had more democracy, and for federalists, more democracy implies a stronger polity, a greater state-like polity beginning to surface at the EU level. For a federal system to function very well, of course, you have to have the transnational coordination between the different members of the EU, but also that vertical participation, that vertical connection between the supranational, national, regional, local politics. And I think that all of those two things have been strengthened in this election. So what does this rather surprising outcome say about the outgoing Parliament, and indeed the outgoing Commission, famously promised by its president as a more political Commission? And is there a connection between Juncker's promise of a more political Commission and a more successful Parliament? Now, as serious folk, we've got to look beneath the surface of it here. And if you look as I have briefly, one needs to do more work on this, on those questions where the Commission and Parliament have fallen out in the last 5 years, the questions where they formally disagreed. So it has been impossible to carry a proposal of the Commission through the Parliament. One only discovers two things. First, a Commission proposal to grant the member states greater national discretion over GMOs, and secondly, a proposal on the budget to transfer funds that had been promised from CAP and CFP, the agricultural policy, the old classical questions of budgetary expenditure, to what I would call the more progressive form of economic structural reform. Those were two proposals of the Commission which I thought were rather good, but in fact were blocked in the Parliament because they were thought by the Parliament to be too progressive. Interesting. The forces of progress aren't exclusively in the Parliament. Parliaments can be obstructive to reform. And this Parliament, the old Parliament, the outgoing Parliament, because it is more parliamentary, can act as a brake to integration and the growth of the polity of the EU. The Council, on the other hand, has only blocked the Commission once. Formally. I'm talking about formal proposals from the Commission. And I don't know if any of you do know what that is. Good. It was on a proposal to make the comitology procedure more transparent. So here we have the Council acting as a brake on what I would describe as progress. Of course, the political agenda has been controlled by the European Council, more or less, and frequently it controls it by keeping things from being discussed, by obstructing the discussion of some things which might otherwise have been discussed. And I'm thinking here primarily of the 5 presidents' report on EMU, on completion of EMU, which was published in 2012 and has not been discussed properly in the European Council. We find, because of the conservative position of the Prime Ministers and Presidents and Chancellors in the European Council, the discussions on the reform of the ESM, the stability mechanism, to turn it into an EMF, a monetary fund, seem to me to be going in the wrong direction. So the ESM transformed to an EMF will be an intergovernmental instrument under the complete control of the member states, as opposed to a more federal instrument, which I think we need. And to back up the slow progress on banking union, the thing that could have been and ought to have been agreed in the last 5 years, the deposit insurance scheme for banks has been blocked. Mr. Tusk might have a lot of qualities, but he ain't no federalist. His emphasis has been on stability and unity, which aren't bad things in themselves, but he is opposed to reform of the EU. So in constitutional terms, the last 5 years have been negative. The Commission itself, which began with great ambitions, has had recourse to scenario building. We've had 5 and then a further 6. But these have been, frankly, no more than an academic exercise that we could have done here if we'd had the tutelage of Professor Vessels in charge of our scenario building exercise. Ours would have been better than the Commission. The Commission's scenarios seem to alternate between doing less better and doing more but worse. It is not a surprising. It is in that case not surprising that the outcome of those scenarios has disappeared from the discussions that are called rather grandly the strategic agenda. Mr. Juncker likes to say, like Mr. Barroso before him, and his successor, I don't know who it'll be, but he or she will say the same thing, that they want the Commission to be big on big things and small on small things. But yet we had President Juncker proposing that we pass a law of the EU to prevent our clocks changing every spring and every autumn. I mean, I'm fond of the guy, don't get me wrong. But I just want to, to point out that these last 5 years have not been as glorious as we might have hoped. There has been no serious attempt to fully exploit the powers and instruments of the Treaty of Lisbon. The passerelle clauses, which we will put in precisely to permit a more flexible, fluid process of reform, have not been touched. And because we haven't grappled with the thorny issues of pooling sovereignty in the Eurozone, I think that the EU is still ill-prepared to confront the next crisis that will undoubtedly come. The Commission and the Council have, however, grappled quite well with issues of rule of law that have cropped up, especially in Budapest and Warsaw. And they've tackled quite well the ongoing corruption problems in Bulgaria and Romania. The salience of rule of law has grown extraordinarily in the last years, and the importance of stamping out corruption is now seen properly, not only to be a bureaucratic exercise, but a democratic exercise. it is not democratic to be corrupt. So it's not all bad, but the treaty has not been fully exploited, and there is all prospect of treaty change at this point does look far distant. So my own criticism of the Treaty of Lisbon, which I actually greatly admire and support on the whole, but my criticism of it that it is too prohibitive and is not sufficiently permissive to allow a government of this new polity to surface is still extremely relevant. And this excess of prohibition and the absence of permissiveness is especially important in the fiscal rules that you see inscribed in the Article 126 and Protocol 12. A greater political acceptance of the Court of Justice's tendency to support implied powers, the growth of the implied powers out beyond the more constricted formal conferred or powers that you see in the treaty, the political institutions haven't really picked up on that opportunity. The Commission's report sent to the CBU summit, the informal meeting of the Prime Ministers we had just last month. No, sorry. Are we still in this month? Yes. On the
Last day.
9th of May, the Commission's input to that was a paper on communications policy, on public relations policy, as opposed to being anything of real importance. And then finally, on the negative end of things, of course, Parliament, especially the EPP group, blocked the proposal to have a transnational list for the European Parliament. In this Parliament, as it did in the previous Parliament, with the outcome that the Spitzencandidate process, which you might discuss a bit afterwards if you like, is in my view fictive and is not to provide the cadre of leadership that we really require in the EU. So we are at a turning point. I think we always are at a turning point in the EU. So it's although it might be a little bit of a cliche, it's always worthwhile prompting oneself that things could go either way. One could go to more integrative federal polity or not. So it's clear that the old assumptions of the past, where we always agreed that widening and deepening of the European Union could go on in parallel, are now over. It survived as a guiding mantra, if you like, because it permitted some small federal steps to be taken in the absence of teleology that sought to define the mission of the ever closer union of Europe. that you see in the treaties. Each new treaty was contributing to the development of this polity and the growth of supranational authority in some agencies that we know, the Commission, the Central Bank, the Court of Justice, of course, was affected. But on the sidelines, there were people who took notice of this and were distressed at this progress towards an ill-defined federal future. And principally in that class of distress, of course, were the British, are the British, and were the British, who began at Maastricht to pull out of the cozy consensus by demanding and being granted the opt-outs from core common policies of the EU. Brexit is a disaster that has not yet happened, but I believe it is going to, and it ought to. I think that the Article 50 can be proven as a sensible provision to have included in the treaty. There was great controversy at the time, but I think that all of us who were responsible for these things in the convention were quite correct to put in a safety and escape clause for a state that objected to this federalization of the EU. I don't think we were necessarily always thinking of the British when we included this in the treaty, although that was present in the discussions of the convention. I think we were more thinking of Greece, and it was necessary to include an Article 50 clause of the type that we have that prescribes the procedure for an orderly withdrawal from the EU in order to obstruct a position in which a country, and we were thinking here of Greece, without any doubt, could be expelled from the EU, because there were some people at that time who would have quite happily pushed Greece out. So that had to be prevented, and quite a good way to prevent a thing that you think is not right to happen is to include in the treaty a clause that provides for the obverse of the thing you dislike. But the withdrawal agreement that has been agreed by the British government, but not yet by the Parliament and all the rest of us in the EU, of course, sets an important new precedent. It leaves the EU smaller, weaker, and poorer. And that is not consistent with the historic mission of the ever closer union and our confident belief in the past that if we worked on it, we could project greater security and prosperity across the continent of Europe. After 2004, with a great new expansion of the EU, we'd expected things to have gone more confidently, without such disruption as they have with respect to the Central and Eastern European countries. The greater questioning now of the values and principles of the EU that you see in Article 2, and the principles of solidarity that will percolate through the whole of the treaty, and of the importance of the independence of the judiciary are now in question. Further an enlargement to Turkey and the Western Balkans has ground to a halt. And in both of those cases, I think things are going backwards. The current neighbourhood partnerships that we have, including Norway's in the economic area, and Switzerland out of the economic area, and with the Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, these new type association agreements are in trouble. And so I hope that in the next 5 years the EU will be able to craft a more coherent and intelligent long-term strategy for its neighbourhood. And we need to be more transparent about this, more democratic and more upfront with the actuality, to be clearer to the applicants, to the candidates, to the aspirants, that joining an emerging federal polity is very difficult and increasingly complex as we ourselves define more clearly the historic mission of the ever closer union. The challenge is to manage differentiated integration. So those on the outside of the EU can still be part of an integrated process without becoming a member of the EU. And this implies a much stronger core at the centre of the EU, a concentration of executive authority at the heart of the EU, grounded on the Commission, which must be permitted to have all the assets, the instruments and the competences that it really needs to produce quality public policy across the spectrum, domestically and externally. I see three-tier concentric circles, which are broadly speaking faithful to the three Copenhagen criteria. The first of those, as you know, is to respect the values and the principles of the EU, and to support the legitimacy of the EU effort. That's not as easy as it looks, but it is an absolutely important foundation principle for a third country that aspires to have a good partnership with the EU. The second criterion is that a state can be competitive in the context of the single market, of the acquis communautaire. In the past, we've thought always that in order to enjoy the privileges, the fruits of the single market, then you had to be a full member of it. Brexit, you can see how a form of closer regulatory alignment would permit the British a greater access to the internal market, respecting, of course, its norms, applying in a trustworthy fashion the regulatory framework of the EU, but on the outside of membership. But the third Copenhagen criterion is to accept the historic mission of political, economic, and monetary union. And that is precisely what the Brits are not able to do. So, are we able, in the EU over the next 5 years, to construct a form of dynamic association? Perhaps we used to call it privileged partnership, that will foster cooperation, manage conflicts, and encourage convergence? Are we able to fashion a fresh template for third country neighbourhood, with the EU forming strong normative frameworks that the neighbours can also apply, based on treaties which subscribe to sustainable development and open society and collective security. These are big things which require more sober reflection than we have had indeed at Sibiu or indeed anywhere else yet. If we are to be able to devise such sophisticated partnerships, we've got to agree that they will require strong governance at the heart of the EU, as I've already mentioned, but also a system of joint governance between the third country and the EU for those things that fall within the orbit of those new association agreements. And that joint governance, some of that you can see in the withdrawal agreement of the United Kingdom, some you can see in the Ukraine association agreement of 2014, but that joint governance must, to some extent, include a joint court. So it isn't only the political institutions of the EU that will have to change direction and their culture, but also the Court of Justice in Luxembourg. I hope that this next leadership can stop the tendency to promise more than the EU can deliver, and will not just impose more tasks on the EU while declining to commensurately grant them the assets, the money, the instruments, and the powers that they need to successfully give effect to those new tasks. I, as president of the Spinelli Group, have published a program that you have here, I think, which was produced in the autumn of last year, which prescribes in detail the institutional changes which we think can be done within the next decade. We don't underestimate the complexity of doing it, or the fact that it will provoke a nationalist reaction. But we believe with President Macron that it's now time for the EU to have a concept of sovereignty, to demand a sovereignty of the EU, not to replace the sovereignty of the member states, but supplement that precious national sovereignty, which is proudly preserved by most people. We think that an EU which protects the interests of its people, the security interests, it's both domestically and abroad, will be attractive. But if we are to go down this sovereignty track, which Macron has spoken about with extreme flourish, as he does, we have to recognize that we need a sovereign, a polity that has sovereignty must have a form of sovereign government, which of course at present in the EU we have. The Spinelli Group has spelled out what form that should take. Primarily a government being created out of the Commission. We see treaty change as being very necessary if the disintegrative tendencies of Brexit dramatically illustrates are to be blocked and turned back. A treaty revision process has to be awfully well prepared, and I think prepared far more thoroughly and fluently than the previous efforts that we've had at altering the treaty. The convention was a great success, a great experiment, and it was a great privilege to be in it. And we had asked for it for a long time, but it came at us rather unexpectedly, and we had not fully prepared our political forces to exploit it to the full, certainly not to explain to our people what it meant. If we're to have a proper constitutional settlement of the EU, we can't neglect this time to carry the public with us. There are a number of proposals in this Spinelli Group thing, including transnational party lists, the creation of federal political parties that will that are attuned precisely to crossing that gulf between what happens in and what happens elsewhere. Speaking of Canada, which we were and we ought to, I'm very struck by how the function of especially the Liberal Party of Canada, has been a federator all these years. It has been a part of the federal experiment of Canada. It hasn't always worked well, hasn't always been in power. It's always been there to, as part of the political process, of the democratic political process, as an important player. We have nothing of that type in the EU. And then in the Spinelli Group Manifesto and elsewhere, we complete our catalogue of things that have to be changed by arguing that if we make a success of these new association agreements, building on that success, we can consider including in the new treaty an article, what I called an article 49 bis, which is a formal new class of associate member, conforming to the first two of those Copenhagen criteria, but not the third. So, in conclusion, I've been asked to speak about the quality of democracy in the as it is. My conclusion is it's doing quite well, but it's incomplete and is insufficiently federal, and it will not become fully democratic until and unless it becomes fully federal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for commenting the basic analysis of the processes you lived through and you shaped. I will use directly the comments. Now, you might raise the question, should we start more with persons? Then you would have a question in any group, whom would you select as president of the European Council? And I would guess also of the other, let's say, the other bodies, because that's the package. Who would be your favorite candidate? And the marketing question. Good guy, that guy, woman, with regard. I think for many of you, later on you will have, later on means in 20 or 30 years, it's very interesting to read what you then think about Merkel's years as Chancellor of Germany and as a strong person in the European Council. So perhaps we start with that because that's juicy, and then we come to the more other issues, namely what kind of project should be run or would be run after Brexit. Perhaps PESCO would be perhaps a starting point, and then the transnational listing. So first your personal taste of the person.
I mean, I was quite conscious when I was speaking that quite a few of you were not looking at me. But I don't have eyes right in the back of my head. I had expected this question, especially the Spitzenkandidat to be up, and it's a very good question to ask. I put money, hard money, proper money, at awfully good odds on this thing.
Pounds or euros?
Euros. On a certain Christine Lagarde to become president of the Commission.
Oh.
That might have gone, but I think that we must look outside the formal Spitzenkandidaten of Manfred Weber and Franz Timmermans. Isn't because they have any particular faults or failings as people. In fact, I'm fond of them both in their own way. But in the absence of transnational lists, as I described earlier, I think that this Spitzenkandidat thing is a bit of a fraud on the people. I certainly think that you need, as President of the Commission, somebody with a lot of government experience, either in the Commission or in national or in terms of Christine Lagarde's case, in the international organisation. And I think you need somebody, of course, who will appeal to a cross-party majority in the Parliament, an absolute majority in the Parliament, and that will not be achieved if we only do that Weber or Timmermans track. I hope Mr. Tusk was commanded at this meeting last week of the European Council. No, sorry, it was this week on Tuesday to go and do a search. He then immediately flew away to Tajikistan, where he's been ever since. And mind boggles about what he's going to come back with from Baku or wherever it is. But clearly, we've got to somehow increase the size of the pool. The talent pool must be enlarged. We must go out recruiting. And especially to find women who will be able to lead at least an institution, if not two. I don't know about Chancellor Merkel, what she's planning to do, but there is speculation that she might decide she wants to come to Brussels. I somehow think it's unlikely, but there are.
Be out of job.
Yeah, she might be out of a job. Barnier is in the frame. He's done a reasonably good job, I would say, at the Brexit dossier, but Brexit is not a success. He has not pulled it off as he had expected to have done by now. And he's quite old. He's my age, and I wonder if that's quite the profile that you need.
Mr. Trump.
Yeah. Well, there you are. There you are. His honest answer is I simply have no idea who is going to be thrown up out of this discussion. But I think we've got to, we have to not think of it as a constitutional crisis. It's not. It's a political process. And if Parliament disagrees with the Council and the Council disagrees with the Parliament, that's fine. the treaty has foreseen that, and we know what will happen if that doesn't occur. I do hope it can be concluded in the autumn quite promptly, because I do not think that it's in the interests of us or of Mr. Tusk or Mr. Juncker to be asked to carry on. I think that they are perhaps both rather tired and they need a big rest. And I also think, here we are, preaching at the Congo the importance of an orderly transition of power. And we can't achieve that in the EU. It'll look pretty odd. And all the goodness that has come out of the parliamentary elections, increased turnout and interest, will easily be dispelled if there's a protracted problem over finding the leaders of the institutions.
What do you think about Mrs. Merkel? That was the other.
Well, I think she's a great lady. I mean, I think she's contributed a lot. I think she ought to have wished to compete with the reputation of Chancellor Kohl in terms of the things that she's brought to the EU. I think that she, at present, must be disappointed by that. So there's a chance that she will have a further opportunity before she ends her career to do more. I expect quite a lot of that will depend on Mr. Merkel, which I have no intrusion into his into our own private life.
Okay, we have the other questions now, transnationalist, and linked with that the Brock issue with transnationalist. Did you kick him out of the Spinelli Group? Because he was against transnationalism.
Daryl Elmer and I have fought this battle for 20 years. He doesn't see that as clearly as I did, that you need to have an ingredient of federal politics in the EU that works. He says that there isn't a federation on earth that has transnational lists for their legislature. He's correct, but he ignores the fact that in America there's a federal president whom everyone votes for, that has created these grand federal political parties that work across the United States. No, we didn't kick him out, because that's not the sort of organisation we are. We're a club, and you don't kick people out of clubs for political disagreements. But he has retired now, and I do hope that the EPP, under its fresh regime, will have will come to support now transnational lists in a way that it hasn't in the past. Ever since the departure of Wilfred Martens, who was a great Belgian federalist of the old school. I was working very closely with him on this project of transnational lists. In the Meseberg Declaration of last June, President Macron secured Mrs. Merkel's agreement to a footnote being put in it that they are determined to have transnational lists in place by 2024, and it's part of the Spinelli exercise to see that he can keep everyone else to that commitment.
We have, let's say, I don't know who raised the question, actual motivation. Is there more behind that than, let's say, what was just mentioned? Well, the person who raised the question about translationist, yeah.
Yeah, because I have the feeling, I mean, I do remember that the EPP, they gave kind of a formal statement.
Can you stand up because
sorry.
the people back there?
Yeah, I remember that the EPP was giving a formal statement on why they didn't like it, and I simply don't remember it, and I know that I felt already that there was some that couldn't be the whole truth. So that was my question, if you have insights on that.
Well, I mean, you know, grubby politics is always there with us. The EPP had the President of the Commission, President of the European Council, going back 10 years with the President of the Commission, I think right back to Delors was the last President of the Commission who was not from the EPP group. Is that right, Wolfgang? Probably. Yeah, you see. No, Prodi was not, but he was all over the place, Jeremiah. Never quite knew where he was from. And they wanted to keep those posts. They wanted to keep part of the opposition of Guy Verhofstadt to the Spitzencandidate process is this time is that Manfred Weber and Brock were instrumental in destroying the proposal of the transnational list. So we are now having our rebellion. And that's why he won't become President of the Commission. But also that's why Guy Verhofstadt will become President of the Commission.
Thank you.
What about this after Brexit? Is this a new push for more integration? At least that, as I read the question.
I mean, I hope so, but that depends on the quality of this leadership that comes out, and the appreciation of how awful the Brits can be if the Brexit is done so badly that they end up aggrieved, belligerent, nationalistic, 35 kilometers from Calais. I whatever it is, I don't know how many. It's not far. On a clear day, you can look across. I can remember the first 20 years of the EEC were plagued for the six by the question of what on earth are we going to do with the Brits? And we don't want the next 20 years to suffer that same issue. I mean, you know, it's perverse, but I believe it is important now that the Brits accept the withdrawal agreement, which I think is very good. I was a bit complicit in it. I feel a bit close to it, but improve the political declaration, which describes the framework for what will happen is next in the direction that I've described in what I was speaking about earlier, about a greater regulatory alignment between the United Kingdom outside and the Union. But that for the Brits would be, without any doubt, that's what the Brits have really always wanted. And the democratic thing is therefore to grant it now, while we have the opportunity. And then I hope that the 27 under fresh leadership will be able to exploit the opportunities that they have to reform the EU in the absence of the Brits. There's always been a break on integration. They haven't been exclusively responsible for this, but they have been very largely responsible for not progressing as far as we ought to have progressed in the direction that I've spoken of. Perhaps I'm being optimistic.
Okay, I would like to raise the question also for those. Apparently, doesn't work. My mobile telephone with that. At least the technicians tell me that Apple is not suited for this kind of approach. So, who would raise the question now out of the room directly?
I was quite intrigued by
You have to also
yes.
introduce yourself. That's always a little bit easier.
Hello, I'm Thomas. And I was very intrigued by your suggestion of a privileged partnership, which well, certainly in Germany we heard in the Turkish relations with the European Union. And I think you suggested Article 49b. Wouldn't that imply the necessity of also having an Article 50b, in the sense that a country, upon weighing the cost-benefit relationship with the European Union, based on what this privileged partnership actually means and actually offers in terms of incentives, would then decide to downgrade from a full membership to the new privileged partnership? Because I heard many times now, also in, say, EU circles, and I remember at one of the CIF meetings that we had with the Austrian presidency, we were told secretly, oh no, we shouldn't be having too good of an agreement with the British, because then otherwise so many other countries will leave as well. And I was wondering, well, if that is truly so, if you are really afraid of that, then what does that say about the state of the European Union? So where is that tipping balance? Where is that cost-benefit? Where does it change? Especially if you take away some of the financial incentives for countries such as Hungary and Poland that's being discussed, might that then not tip the balance for them to go under such a new partnership as well? Yeah,
That's a very good question. I've always seen my 49 piece class as a parking place if needs be. Either a long-term car park for a country that, having applied for complete membership and being inside, could choose not to have that final federal qualitative leap that I've been talking about earlier, and we've got to create for them a comfortable place for them to be. We haven't got that at present. As you know, you're either a complete member state or you're completely outside. I understand there was that fear that after Brexit, quite a lot of other countries would wish to emulate the Brits, but frankly, after the awful mess that the Brits have made trying to get out of the European Union, that fear has disappeared. I don't think that there can be anyone else who now thinks, oh, that's a good wheeze. but that fear, especially if the arguments over is that the MFF, for instance, become really bad, that fear that Orban might say, well, look, I don't agree with this proposal, and I'm going to I'm going to trigger the Article 50. Perhaps he might not mean that he wishes to leave the EU, but he has the power to put everyone else through this saga of negotiation. The Brits have put the EU through. In fact, twice. We had our first renegotiation terms of membership only 12 months after we had got in.
Yeah.
After 30 long years of trying to get in. And then Cameron with his next. I mean, you know, we have to be cleverer than the opposition. I still think that the risk of disintegration is there, but I just don't think it's quite as acute as it once was. If we can get an orderly completion of the Brexit process, I think that will calm people and you know, in the years to come, some other country might say, well, look what the Brits have got. I also, incidentally, think that if the Brits get a very good package deal out of the EU, then the other third countries, including Norway, plus Iceland and Switzerland, might want to upgrade their
You are optimistic, yes.
I was in the Ukraine quite recently talking to Ukrainian, believe it or not, who alarmed me that their hero of the EU was Mr. Orban. They were saying they want to be in and they want to act like Mr. Orban acts inside the EU. That is a source of disquiet. So to channel Serbia and the Ukraine into a settlement which is not full membership, perhaps it's the more intelligent thing to do.
Okay, I would like to have one more, and then it's time for coffee break. You would like to come? Yeah. Perhaps you would like to come.
I fear that everybody remembers who I was. Director of this institute for a long time. And president of commerce for a too long time too. Sovereignty is the word I would like to come back to. I never bridged the gap in my mind between the historical evolution of the concept of sovereignty and the historical evolution of the concept of federalism. So I wonder whether it is a good idea to bridge the gap between the idea of a state like European Union in a federal key with the tradition of sovereignty. It is not by chance that the proposal comes from France, where the idea of sovereignty has this long tradition. And to put it very shortly, and that's the point where I see close to an incompatibility with federalism, sovereignty means that all the power is in one place. There is no power left for beyond and no power left for below. So how can we apply the idea of sovereignty to a federation where we sustain exactly the opposite idea, that power is shared between different levels? The only way I could imagine something like a compromise, but it would still be a compromise I would feel uneasy with, is that we distinguish sovereignty along sectoral lines and say one level can be sovereign in one field and another level can be sovereign in another field. policy field. But it isn't really a convincing concept neither. So the question is whether we should not give up sovereignty as a concept if we construct, have in mind to construct a federal structure, a federal system which is true to its own principles.
Yeah. Verrocchi Proter is a very attractive concept, which people instinctively feel that the complexity and scale of contemporary problems has transcended that of the member state, of the nation state, in terms of climate, in terms of security, in terms of economic growth, even in terms of transport, functional, practical things, even in terms of education. People are now frustrated that they can't be fully educated, can't travel as much as they would like inside their own member state, and that the claims of national political parties to be able to solve all the problems that can confront us at every national election inside the confine of the old nations is completely absurd. Most people can instinctively appreciate that now. So what are we going to call it? I am impressed how the issue of sovereignty has so much affected the discussions about the future of Europe, that I don't think we can neglect it. And I believe it is possible to disperse political power through a federal system that can cope with two sovereignties, as we do with two ideas of citizenship. You have your own citizenship of your own nation, and you have one of the EU. And I think that implies something about the EU power that we haven't yet properly articulated in a form that people can easily understand. I think that the idea that the EU can recoup some kind of imperial sovereignty that was lost after the First World War in terms of the dual monarchy is quite interesting. I mean, we had until 1919 an Austro-Hungarian empire with many languages and peoples in a sort of differentiated integration. And it was complex and didn't work very well in the end.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean to say that with our greater experience of that period of our history, and with our greater interest and passion, I would say, for democracy, it isn't able to succeed if we were to try it fresh. I am not closed to the idea that it could be, in the end, quite patriotic to be pro-EU, to be prouder, indeed, of being pro-European than it is to belong to one's own state. I don't see why that is inherently an idea that we can't exploit nowadays.
That sounds very good. As a final sentence, I'm sovereign in saying now it's coffee break. Thank you very much.